All right, I'm going to click go live. We're going to give it a few seconds to sync up and make sure that the stream actually comes to life here, because sometimes it does take a few minutes for the stream to come to life. Once I know that we're up and running and the stream is actually live, we'll verify that everything is looking good. So just giving it a couple minutes to get synced up and going here and making sure that everything is looking good. If you are watching right now, please in the chat let me know if the volume and the audio is okay. Let me know if you can hear me. I am just going to make sure that everything is still. I've had some problems in the past when it comes to going live with live streams. They're kind of my bugaboo. So just let me know that the audio is good, and then we'll get started talking about BGP, Border Gateway Protocol. Says I'm live. All right, cool. So, BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, the CCIE studies and the journey that we're on. Here's the thing, this study group is going to be just a little bit differently from other study groups that you may have seen with CBT Nuggets. You see, how do I put this? I am currently on my journey. I am currently learning. I am in the trenches with you right now. And whereas most study groups are all about, like, here, let me be the authoritative figure and lead the discussion, I kind of wanted this to be more like a jam session where we get together and talk about things that we're going through. So I threw this practice exam thing up on the internet, and it's gone pretty well so far. People really seem to enjoy it. Now I want to talk about some of those specific topics that are within it, any issues that you ran into, issues that I ran into, things that caught me off guard, at least when I was learning. And kind of now that I've gone back and rewatched myself taking this exam, what would I do differently? That's kind of what this is going to be all about. So I am going to keep my eyes on the chat. We'll do some questions and answers and stuff. But without further ado, let me jump to my screen and we'll start talking about Border Gateway Protocol. So let me just change this here, and then we're going to hit Test one, two. Oh, man. Okay. So now can you hear me? Okay. So maybe you can hear me now. Okay. Now someone says, okay, so trying some new stuff here with that audio, and apparently it didn't work. So let me jump back one more second here. Okay, sorry about that. That's embarrassing. I like I said, well, you didn't hear me say it at the beginning. At the very beginning of this thing, I said that live streams are my bugaboo. For some reason, they just get me. They crush me pretty hard. So let's start over. I'm so sorry. Thank you all for hanging tight and watching with me. Now, BGP, Border Gateway Protocol. What are we here to talk about? We're going to jump back to this whiteboard, and we're going to talk about Border Gateway Protocol. So sorry about that. Here we go. Let's take this from the top. So BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, this is the live stream. This is going to be the session that's all about how the internet is built and things that really caught me off guard. And I hope that we can talk about things that may be catching you off guard too, because I'm very much in my journey and I'm very much learning. Oh, do we have an echo? Do I have another hot mic somewhere? No echo, so we're good? Okay. All right, so things that are catching me off guard when it comes to BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, and things that are really, I think, challenging and the important things about BGP. When we look at the exam blueprint, the actual topics themselves, this is a big section of the exam, just BGP. I mean, the network infrastructure only accounts for 30% of the exam, right? But BGP is a big part of that. And that's because BGP is the thing that has the most configurations to it. It's the most nuanced and it's the most powerful. That's why I like to say that BGP is a very deliberate protocol. It's not necessarily dynamic in a lot of senses. It does exactly what we tell it to do and nothing more, nothing less. And that's why it's actually easy to mess up, because it can do so much in a bunch of different ways. And you probably saw that if you were watching my BGP session, my BGP exam topics. There were things that messed me up. So the things that messed me up, the things that really still catch me off guard, are right here in the policy section. Conditional advertisement, outbound route filtering, and communities. When do we do filtering versus when do we do communities? You saw that was one of the ways that it really messed me up. So other things that we're talking about was route reflectors and then aggregations. That's another thing that I want to talk about in this particular session. So let's bring this up. Let's bring back to the topology and talk about this. Route reflectors and confederations and scaling. When it talk about IBGP in particular, we're talking about a scaling issue because by default, if you really want them all to share network or route prefixes with each other, they have to be a full mesh. That's why they came up with things like route reflectors and confederations. And a lot of y'all were quick to point out that confederations are not on the exam blueprint, whereas route reflectors are. And in the first challenge, there aren't route reflectors. So here we go. We put confederations. I put a confederation right here. Why did I do that? If it's not on the exam topic, why did I do it? Because confederations are out there in the real world. They're important to know. And if you didn't get it, if you didn't study that, that's okay. Like, don't worry. I just put it out there because, it's something that I knew how to do, and it's a real world scenario, and I thought it was important to do. And you could see that it actually tripped me up a little bit. The behavior from one confederation sharing routes to the other kind of behaves like an eBGP relationship. Now, the route reflector section, if you've already worked ahead, that comes in the MPLS Layer 3 VPN section. And this is what I was trying to say earlier, where I found out that I didn't have a mic. Let's talk about this. MPLS Layer 3 VPN is very cool because, it's an MPLS Layer 3 VPN. And here in our section, we've got our provider edges, and we've running IBGP throughout this in order to exchange these routes. So when we've got customer 1 sending in routes here, customer 2 sending in routes here, they're going to be segmented in their own VRFs. And when these get redistributed into BGP, they become VPN v4 routes. The challenge tells us that R1 should correctly forward VPN v4 routes throughout the topology. So how does it do that? Because we're not talking IPv4 routes anymore, and that's probably where we've all gotten familiar with route reflectors. We're talking about VPN v4 routes. So check this out. This is the way this is really going to work. I'm on R1 right now, and if I give it a show run section BGP, see this? This is what I was trying to show earlier. The route reflector configuration comes under the address families. So this is a VPN v4 route that we learned from our customer edges, not from within our own topology. So we're using the route reflector configuration to reflect the VPN v4 routes onto the next destination. So that way, let me go back here. That way, when R4 sends a VPN v4 route onto R1, it reflects it to R2, R5, and R3, and then they redistribute the routes back out and into the customer edges again. It's really cool. And I thought this was a unique way to see route reflectors in action rather than the traditional IPv4 challenge that everybody's kind of seen and gotten used to. So that's why I did it that way. If you haven't gotten ahead, spoiler alert, that's coming in the MPLS Layer 3 VPN video, which is going to release on Monday. But, so there weren't route reflectors in the network challenge or in the internet challenge here, but it does come in BGP, in a BGP configuration in MPLS Layer 3 VPN. Now, things that really did trip me up. We're going to talk about, first of all, the communities. When we said one of our challenges here was to stop the advertisement of ISP 401's loopback outside of this particular confederation. And probably the cleanest way that I should have handled that was just to simply filter the prefix at the edges right here from going outbound. Now, why didn't I do that? Well, the first thing is if I were to create a filter here, I'd also have to create it here, and that's just more to maintain, and it's less scalable in a real world situation. However, it didn't, the exam task itself or the challenge that I wrote didn't explicitly say to do it one way or the other. So I thought, like, you know what, this would be cool if I could just do it with a community. That way I only have to create one route map that sets the community and then the rest handles itself. And then, of course, you know, I forgot to configure the route map in two directions. I only configured the route map in one direction. So many lessons to be learned right there, first of all, is the behavior of communities as well as mental stamina. I mean, I'm an hour into this challenge and I start slipping up. I start making careless mistakes like not applying the route map to both neighbors. And, you know, there's something to be said about that. Or even, you know, skipping an entire problem altogether because I got anxious and jumped ahead. So I guess the tip there, the advice I give there is just remember that mental stamina is a thing. And sometimes going for the easiest solution, in fact, usually going for the easiest solution is the best solution unless they explicitly tell you to do something else. So one of the places where I did explicitly say do something else actually comes in MPLS Layer 3 VPN again. I said R1 should leverage templates. Well, if we look at the exam blueprint here one more time, we've got templates and peer groups. Peer groups are not templates. They are two different configurations. So your temptation when you jump into that may be to configure a peer group, but it explicitly says leverage templates to do this. Whereas in the other, you know, problems that I created, it doesn't say explicitly use a community or not a community or something like that. So that's something also to keep in mind is like you do have to take the challenges verbatim, and when it's not explicitly said, you're free to do whatever you want. At least in my opinion, you should be free to do whatever you want. And oftentimes I feel like going for the simplest solution is the best one. So again, sorry about those audio problems when we got started. Thank you, those of you, for hanging out and making it with me through that. That's, you know, it's embarrassing, but it happens, and it won't happen again for the remaining live streams. So let's take a look one more time at some of these. Oh yeah, we said we were going to talk about aggregation. So that was another thing that got me at the very end of the video. And again, it probably comes down to mental stamina and staying focused. I used the aggregate address command. So I'm going to put aggregate address here, but I forgot to use the summary only. Now, it also didn't specify that it should maintain the AS path attribute. So that's another thing that you have to keep in mind is the AS set command for maintaining the actual full AS path instead of just where the aggregation occurs. So look for those things on the exam itself when it tells you you need to summarize all of these routes in such a way that we are going to unsuppress or leak one specific prefix out. That, to me, in our case, that was our exam challenge here. I should have used summary only. I ended up using it, but it took some troubleshooting to forget it, or to get to that point. And then the last thing was the AS set in case we needed to provide the full AS path. So those are the things that were catching me off guard. Outside of that, I feel relatively comfortable with all of the remaining BGP items that are listed here on the list here. You know, obviously, I think one of the things that scares all of us is regex, unless you work with regex or BGP regularly, and those AS path ACLs. That's definitely something that will scare some people. So, yeah, regex is something I'm going to need to brush up on. Of course, we should know that the $$ means this local AS. Routes originated in this local AS. That's one that you should just commit to memory, because it may be one that you need to use if we're trying to manipulate or load balance how traffic comes in or goes out of our AS. So I think that's another thing that I tried to do in this particular challenge is we have 2 exit points for AS 400. And there's a lot of manipulation that can happen when there's 2 exit points. We can manipulate how traffic comes into the AS or how traffic goes out or load balanced out of the AS there. And I would fully expect there to be lots of challenges surrounding that. Let's see. So do y'all have any questions for me? While I take a breath here and look at this topology that's going on and look at some of the chat questions. It's so embarrassing about that audio stuff. It happens to me all the time. It really gets me. Yeah, so we can talk about BGP in general. Like I said, it's a very deliberate protocol. You can do things like dynamic neighbor associations when you do the BGP listener. In fact, let's Google that. BGP listen Cisco, something like that. So this is what we're talking about, the BGP listen range command. This is something that I didn't put. So thanks, Roger Perkin, for your blog here, for letting us use this. This is really, really cool. Go check out Roger Perkin's blog where we've got this. The idea here is that we can create a peer group, and then dynamically, when we specify if peers come in from a specific IP address or a range of IP addresses, automatically form a neighbor relationship with them, as long as the things, show up correctly, like the remote AS. So again, shout out to Roger Perkin for providing this cool free information when it comes to learning how dynamic BGP neighbor relationships can come to life. This is something that you'll probably want to study up on, is the BGP listen range command, in case we do need to have. In fact, dynamic neighbors are listed right there in 1.5a. So that's pretty cool too. Yep. And we had some fun stuff coming up in the MPLS Layer 3 VPN network. So yeah, that's a good question there. Any particular topic you are worried about? So is this specific to BGP? When it comes specific to BGP, I'm going to be worried about policies in general, and specifically, I am worried about choosing the right solution, because, when I watch these videos of myself working through these problems, and I'm going like, that wasn't the right solution, or that wasn't the best solution. Should I have just filtered that prefix out in this one specific spot, or should I have used a community? See, communities, I think this is one that it's easy to mess up, because we set a community on ISP 400-1. What does it then do? It still advertises the prefix onward to the next hop or the next network, and that's really when the community takes effect, at least most of the time. So if I were to set, say, the no export community right here on ISP 400-2, it would send it on to ISP 200 and ISP 300, and that's when ISP 200 and 300 would go, it says no export, so I shouldn't export it. So if my goal was to not export it out of AS 400, this is not the solution to do it, at least not on the edge, because communities don't really take effect, so to speak, until they've been advertised forward saying, dear neighbor, you should behave this way, not me, you should behave this way because we've set this community. So communities tend to trip me up. And that, I think that really just comes down to practice. I need to practice using communities a lot more. I can make a smaller little lab in EVE-NG here and just practice and figure out the behavior of no export, no advertise, local AS. That's really kind of the point of communities. So should I have used no export right here and then advertised it onwards? Probably would have worked if I had remembered to put the route maps in both directions. I only applied it in one direction instead of both directions. So it sent the community in this direction, but it didn't send the community in that direction. And this guy just kept on behaving the way it always behaved and forwarded the prefixes all the way out to the internet. So communities and careless mistakes tripped me up there. I am definitely concerned about mental stamina and choosing the wrong solution. Some other things... let's see. How do you deal with remembering all the subject? There's so many details to remember. Well, that is a good question. The first thing is I don't remember all the subjects and I screw up a lot. You're really going to see that in the MPLS Layer 3 VPN video on Monday. That I actually created a video on YouTube. I went live, I think, to talk about mental stamina and maintaining mental stamina. There was an issue. I can tell you right now what's going to happen. The green customer runs EIGRP. We already went through this challenge. This challenge was released on Wednesday, where all of the EIGRP configurations took place. But then I wanted to have EIGRP running on the provider edge to the customer edges here. So this needed to be a separate instance of EIGRP. This was a different autonomous system. So for whatever reason, I went to type the commands and it didn't work exactly the way I thought it would, and my brain just imploded. You see, at that point, I'm like 8 hours deep going through this practice lab, and I ended up making the squirreliest, craziest workaround to get that thing to work. I ended up running a VRF on the WAN side and a VRF on the LAN side. Then I redistributed into BGP and then pulled it out of BGP and into this VRF. It was a mess. It sort of worked. It took a lot of troubleshooting and some help from even Cisco employees to help me figure out why it was behaving the way it was, when really I could have just created a whole new EIGRP instance and redistributed between them. That's what I'm talking about when I say like mental stamina really takes over, and then even things that you do remember, you forget. Like, I know that you can create router EIGRP1 and then router EIGRP2 and then redistribute between them. But for whatever reason, in that moment, when I went to make this configuration and it didn't work, I just imploded. And I ended up spending all of this extra time finding this weird worker. I did get it to work. And if you watch this video on Monday, I guarantee you will learn some fascinating stuff about how BGP interacts with EIGRP. But it wasn't the right solution, and I do make sure to call that out, that the right solution was something different. So with all of these things that, you know, it's so much information. You know, I've spent the last year working on network automation, year plus, working on network automation for DevNet course and in auto, and got the DevNet professional. So I'm super comfortable in these topics in this domain. Software-defined infrastructure. I mean, after you've gone through SD Access and DNA Center and SD-WAN, like, you won't forget it. Like, you come out of that with some bruises. And that's one of those things. I'm so fascinated by DMVPN and MPLS Layer 3 VPN that I feel like I've got those locked down pretty good. It's this stuff up here. Like, this list is so overwhelming, especially when it comes to BGP. BGP is so nuanced that the only way I think I'm going to make it out of the BGP and the multicast section is just practice, like going through each one of these things over and over again, just learning how they behave. But I fully anticipate that I'm going to forget some really important stuff, or more importantly, lose my mental stamina, you know, in hour 5 of the exam, and, you know, make a careless mistake. That's the thing that I'm scared about. Let's see some other good questions here. Yeah. SD Access and SD-WAN, you're exactly right. Like, that is, you know, I'm fascinated to see what they do there. You know, my first thought was like, oh, maybe SD Access will be just design. But then, they did a webinar. Peter did a webinar where he talked about the actual exam environment and how to study. And they showed a picture of the actual data center, and they said like this is a DNA center appliance, and 4 switches, Catalyst 9000 switches that go with it. So I'm like, okay, well they actually have a DNA center appliance and the switches, so there's a real chance that we're going to have to configure an SD access fabric. I'll tell you, a lot of heart and soul went into building our DNA Center and SD Access Fabric course at CBT Nuggets. That was probably the biggest challenge I've had in recording and learning yet throughout my career. There was, finding the correct information. It was scattered all over the place. So it took a lot of trying things, didn't work, factory defaulted over, and start over again. So what you do when you're watching our DNA Center course, know that the stuff that we're teaching there is the real battle-tested stuff, because it was basically like a DNA Center appliance showed up at my door one day and it was like, good luck, go get them, Tiger. So we had to really, really learn things the hard way, and I wanted to get a working SD access fabric. So in order to make it work, we had to trudge through mud and try things until we found the right things that work. I mean, I found the correct answers in forum posts. I found the correct answers in Reddit posts. I found the correct answers in white paper PDFs. I found some of the correct answers were only in Cisco Live presentations. I mean, it was crazy, the stuff that we had to go through. So that's what I'm trying to say when it comes to SD access. I feel confident that the study material that you need is our course, because it really is the culmination of all of that troubleshooting and learning and everything that went into that. One more thing I'll say about that is the longest nugget I've ever recorded for CBT Nuggets was closing in right around 17 minutes. And that's troubleshooting LAN automation with DNA Center, because that's a very nuanced topic. And there are like quick start guys who are like, you just click this, and it'll just work. And that's not the case. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done upfront correctly in order for LAN automation to work. And we walk through what those things are and how to troubleshoot it when it doesn't work. So let's see. How many months are you giving yourself to prepare for the exam? So that's a good question. I mean, in some ways I've been studying for over a year now, even though I haven't. I started, really digging deep into network automation June of last year when the DevNet courses were announced at Cisco Live. And all of that is applicable to the CCIE. You can make the same arguments about we recorded Encore and then the NRC course. At that point, I wasn't going for my CCIE, but now it's all applicable to it. Same thing with SD Access. That being said, I had declared in May that I'm going for my CCIE officially. And when I look at it in May, like I already had a lot of boxes checked because I had done recording for Encore and RC and DevNet. And in auto. And how much time do I have left? Well, so first of all, the lab centers are closed. They're going to be closed through the rest of the year. I've heard from people close to the source that they're not going to reopen the lab in the United States until Cisco employees return to work. So even if Texas is fully open, there's a good chance that Cisco won't be fully open and they still won't be open. The other kicker, you guys, is that I have babies on the way. We're expecting kids, and they're due at the very beginning of the year next year. So when they come, I won't be able to take the exam, for an extended period of time after that, because I'm going to be helping with the babies. So that's, I am going to take it. I'm going to take I would love to take it right now, just to have a crack at it. I might not pass, but I want to know what it's like, because nobody else knows what it's like right now. And I want to know where I'm weakest and where I can improve. If they had a remote option tomorrow, I would take it. Guarantee it. But, when am I going to take it? If it doesn't open, January 2, then I'm probably looking at a fall 2021 or even a winter 2021 attempt. I like that too, because it gives me time to read more resources, get more practice in. One of the things I'm excited about reading is Nick Russo's CCIE service provider textbook. And I know you're like, wait, service provider, we're talking enterprise here. There's so much overlap between those two exams, like 60 to 70% overlap, I think is relevant there. And I think his textbook is something like 3,000 pages. So that gives me plenty of time to read it, especially, during my sleep exhausted days in the coming year. So Yeah, I would take it as soon as I could, but realistically, if they're not going to open anytime soon, it'll be late next year when I can take it. Let's see. Yeah, that's definitely going to be my strategy there. So yeah. So BGP, how do y'all feel about BGP? Are you more stressed? That's my question for y'all. Are you more stressed about other topics on the exam than you are about BGP? Are you more stressed about BGP than the other routing protocols? Do you feel stronger in OSPF and EIGRP than you do in BGP or vice versa? I am very eager to hear y'all's opinion about that too. Where does BGP fall on your scale of how stressed do you think I should be about BGP? Let's put it that way. I am very eager to hear y'all's opinion on that. Yeah, that Nick Russo book is CCIE Service Provider. He wrote a textbook on CCIE Service Provider. I think it's leanpub.com. You can always just tweet him. He'll tweet you and let you know the name of that textbook. BGP gives you more stress. Yeah, I mean, yeah, which attribute to use and where. That's exactly it, right? I mean, there's just so many things about BGP. You know, with EIGRP, OSPF, and even spanning tree, because they're kind of dynamic in nature, they're kind of like controlled chaos. You can kind of just trust that they're going to work as long as you manipulate it the right way. Whereas BGP, like if you don't explicitly tell it to do exactly what it's supposed to do, it's not going to figure it out on its own. And that's why I think, and because BGP does so much stuff, I think that's why I'm a little more stressed about it. SD-WAN in the design section, that's a good point too. I mean, SD-WAN, y'all, out of all the things that I've done, I'm like, I don't think SD-WAN is that simple. I definitely think it's powerful. Oh, for sure. I definitely see the value of SD-WAN 110%. But simple? I don't know that I'd call it simple. Definitely takes some practice to get used to SD-WAN and how it's different, templates and policies, and just getting to know Viptela in general too. Spoiler alert for the SD-WAN content that's coming up in this CCIE practice exam. Look at this. Let's jump back to the CCIE Enterprise Blueprint for a second. Nowhere in SD-WAN is it talking about standing up the controllers. So I didn't add anything about configuring the controllers within, that's vSmart, vBond, and vManage, or the certificates there. Nowhere in there is there any actual, so there's design, that's here. We've got design these things. We see vSmart, vManage, vBond, but there's nothing about configure vSmart, vManage, vBond, and stand it up. So in our challenges here, I didn't add anything about actually standing up the controllers. And vManage is not something that I could export a default configuration on. You see, under the hood, it uses a hard drive, and I can't export a hard drive. So, you know, it's kind of a bummer that I couldn't send you like a pre-built controller situation, but for the SD-WAN challenge, it will be on you, the learner, to stand up your controller environment before you can move on to the actual configuration items, which are WAN edge deployments. So when we're talking about WAN edges, and I know we're getting away from BGP at this point, but BGP is part of SD-WAN. You do have to know how to configure BGP in SD-WAN. When it comes to deploying the WAN edges, there is zero-touch provisioning and plug-and-play. That's also not something that you can easily do in a lab environment. You can do it in a lab environment. You have to simulate DNS because it has to find, ztp.viptela.com. So when your device plugs in, as long as it gets an IP address via DHCP and it can resolve global DNS, it's going to find ztp.viptela.com and check in and say, hey, I'm here. This is my serial number. And ztp.viptela.com will say, like, talk to Cisco. Cisco will say, your VBond is located here, and then it comes to life. That's kind of the gist of it. But understanding how to deploy it with how OMP is going to behave, how TLOCs are going to be advertised, and then how to configure these things like IP addresses, OSPF, BGP with templates, and then altering your topology itself, the actual traffic flows itself with localized and centralized policies. That's actually the section that I covered in our SD-WAN course. I was the policy guy. So QoS, I'm sure QoS is going to be on there, or I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't taken the exam. I'm going to bet that QoS will be somehow on there, and maybe a topology change, like going through a service. That's going to be in like sending traffic through a firewall before it gets leaked through a VPN, which is a VRF. Yeah, SD-WAN, it's a big one. Which CCIE am I studying for? Enterprise infrastructure. How am I planning to run the SD Access lab? So I have an SD Access lab. It's sitting about 15 feet in that direction. I have a DNA center appliance, and then I virtualized ICE, a wireless LAN controller, and info blocks. So that's my IPAM. And if you haven't checked out our SD Access course on CBT Nuggets, I cannot stress it enough. That is what you need. You need to watch that because that will teach you how to deploy an SD Access fabric from scratch. You've got your DNA center appliance sitting in a brown box on the floor. What comes next? That's our course. And then includes the ICE configuration. Cisco has said, okay, other things to say real quick before we move on from SD-WAN. I want to make sure I point this out. Cisco, in a forum post somewhere, has said that there will not be C-Edge on at least this version of the exam right now. But you do need to know how C-Edges are deployed because that's what's getting deployed in the real world. So for the exam environment, don't stress about C-Edge until they explicitly say it. Otherwise, no C-Edges, especially for the ENS-DWI course and for when you go out into the real world. SD Access. Cisco has said you don't need to know ICE. They said we're going to give you a pre-configured ICE environment. In the real world, your SD Access fabric will not work unless you configure ICE to actually handle the authentication, the scalable groups, and assigning them to the correct VLAN. That configuration is done in both DNA Center and ICE. So I can't stress this enough. If you don't want to roll up to an employer and say, I know SD Access, I can deploy it because I took the CCIE, and then, you get out there and you have to do all this stuff in ICE, and you're like, I've never seen ICE before. That's why you need our course. You also need to know the nuances that go into deploying LAN automation in the real world, because that is a very real thing. So yeah, that's why, outside of that, if you don't have access to an SD Access environment, the DevNet Sandbox or dCloud is a great way to get hands-on. The dCloud has a great SD Access environment for getting to know assurance. So this section right here, they have an assurance demo version where there's like hundreds of different users, wireless and wired, and different network devices and stuff, and you can actually get hands-on on actually performing troubleshooting and monitoring and automation items. And you can click around and poke through things like the policies in the fabric, but you can't do much. Same thing with the DevNet Sandbox. But it's better than nothing. So if you just need to get familiar with clicking on things, where do I click on things to create a new hierarchy in my topology? Where do I create a new address pool? Where do I create a new micro-segmentation policy? What's the difference between micro-segmentation and macro-segmentation? You got to know those things. Let's see what else here. All right, how can we learn network automation along with networking stuff? It goes back to CBT Nuggets again. We've got a lot of content for the DevNet Associate, the Inato, and our DevCore course is probably around 33% done right now. That being said, let's talk about that. I like this question. There are a lot of stuff on the CCIE exam that occurs nowhere else on any other exams. What are those things? Pretty much 5.2 and 5.3. You see this right here? You need to know Linux. You need to know the CLI Python module. What is the CLI Python module? Give me one. Hang on. We're going to do this. We're going to have some fun here. The CLI Python module. Actually, there's a better way to do this. The CLI Python module is running on our iOS XE devices. So if we have an iOS XE device like this CSR 1000V that's located right here, this is running iOS XE 17.01.01, I think. They have Python on them, and they have Linux on them. So what you can do is you can go into Python. You can create a Python script using VI, and we can call it my script. Yep, kind of doing this, my script.py. And then we can say things like, well, I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head. I think it's import CLI or from CLI, import CLI. But just like any other import statement in Python, you can import CLI. And this, in your Python script, allows you to run CLI commands like show IP interface brief. So if we save this in a variable called brief, we can then say print BR. And that will run these CLI commands on our devices. Take it a step further, the EEM Python module. When we have an EEM applet, something occurs, some sort of event that triggers our EEM applet, we can tell it, run my Python script that I just created. So that way, if somebody shuts down a loopback address, we can find out who that user is and what interface do they shut down, and then run a Python script that may send that data to Slack. We can get a Slack alert that somebody shut down the loopback address or something like that. Basically, the world is your oyster when it comes to Python. Python is on iOS XE, and you can run CLI commands or import requests or any other Python library by using this particular guest shell experience. The guest shell experience is tricky to deploy, and that is what our lab task is. When it comes to that point, the very last nugget that we're going to release on October 21st is setting up the guest shell and creating EEM applets that run scripts that we create. Now, beyond that, I do have a challenge in there about using RESTconf and netconf. They're very basic because we've covered that so extensively on our CVT Nuggets content. I didn't want to go too deep into netconf and RESTconf because if you've watched our content, you've seen that a million times and you know how to work it. But this one right here, this is also new. In the Inato course, they talk about model-driven telemetry, but I'm pretty sure this is using netconf. This particular statement is using an on-change subscription using gRPC. So our automation task in the CCIE practice exam here is when the CDP neighbors change. That's an on-change moment. So it's not just send me this data no matter what every 5 minutes. This is saying only when this data changes, fire off a notification using the gRPC protocol. Where does this really come into play? This usually comes into play when we're streaming data to an ELK stack, which is Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, or a TIG stack, which is, I don't remember. I don't remember what I want to say Telegraph or something, InfluxDB, and then Grafana. These devices are all about ingesting Cisco notifications and data and turning them into a pretty dashboard that you can digest. So that's what this is all about. This automation here is when something changes in our environment, like CDP neighbors or interface status or something, send that data outbound using the gRPC protocol, and that's really going to be destined for something like the TIG or the ELK stack. So that way when we've got a gigantic NOC monitor, we can see, CDP neighbors has changed. What's really going on? So these things are brand new, like 5.2 and a lot of stuff in 5.3, and they don't exist in any other exams. That's why I made sure to include it on our lab tasks and record it. So that way, in the coming weeks or so, you will be able to see and learn how to do these specific things. So thank you for that question, and hang tight. A lot of other stuff is going on here. Let me see. Let's see. Yes, you can. That's a great way to put it. Print CLI, show IP interface brief. If that's what you want to do, you could do it that way. And I was just saying, let's just hold it in a variable so we could do stuff to it later. But you don't have to, Telegraph. Thank you. It was Telegraph. Thank you for that. It's mental stamina, right? It's a thing. Let's see. What else do we have here? I know this is a huge exam. And one of the things I may be telling myself, and I may be lying to myself about it, is there's 3 hours of design and 5 hours of deploy, operate, and optimize. Is it possible to have all of this stuff realistically, if you were really good at deploying an SD Access Fabric, including the time for like automation to occur and stuff, I still can't see that happening any quicker than like 45 minutes to an hour. So if you've only got 5 hours to deploy, operate, and optimize, and that would leave you with 4 hours to do all of this other stuff, I don't know. Like, I'm just wondering, what are they cutting out? That doesn't mean you can cut corners. That doesn't mean, you know, you don't need to know this. You do. You need to know it. Yeah. The DMVPN phase 3 stuff, I think, look at this right here. This is 2 more interesting. I know we're straying way off the path of BGP at this point, but the questions are going away from BGP. So, you know, let's just talk about this. Keywords, troubleshoot, and identify use cases. So there's no config here. No config from scratch. I think that's probably a good thing because they do explicitly call out IPsec and IPv2 using pre-shared keys. So I would fully expect that to mean you need to know how to configure them anyways. Luckily, if you know, hopefully they're not changing the actual IPv2 policies, they're just using the default policies. When I recorded DMVPN for this practice exam thing, I just did it. Let's just configure it from scratch, because if you can configure it from scratch and you know your show commands, chances are you can troubleshoot it. So that's what we're going to do. Not this upcoming week, but the following week. I think it's the Monday, not this upcoming Monday, but the following Monday that comes out. The next thing, identify use cases for FlexVPN. That's design, folks. FlexVPN is covered extensively in the security track of things. It's talked about in SCORE. And I literally just peer-reviewed Keith Barker's FlexVPN content for the SCORE exam yesterday. So I feel a lot better about that stuff now and what its use cases are. I do need to dig into MPLS over FlexVPN. That's something that I'll look into, but I'm not terribly worried about it. But yeah, know that we have content at CBT Next coming on FlexVPN, and you can understand the use cases for it in the SCORE exam. Let's see what else. Can we run SDA on EVE-NG without DNA Center? So I love that question. Let me show you what I did. So I have a DNA Center environment with SD access. So if I fire up my border nodes here and my edge nodes, let's fire them up and watch them come to life. So yes and no, mostly no, because remember, SD access really relies on DNA Center, but it relies on ICE more. The policies that come into play here, Cisco TrustSec is a key protocol that makes SD access work. That way we know which virtual networks that our clients belong in, and then we know if our clients can talk to other clients within the virtual network. Before a packet comes into the edge devices, it needs to be able to know and identify how our users got authenticated and what VLANs they exist in and what their policies are. So without ICE and DNA Center in EVE-NG, you can't truly run an SD access fabrics. But that's one thing I want to make sure that everybody's aware of, is that it's not just DNA Center that makes an SD access fabric work. ICE is actually, I mean, arguably equally, if not more important to an SD access fabric than DNA Center. DNA Center is really the automation and orchestration part of it, but the ongoing operations of a fabric really rely heavily on ICE. So let's bring up, like, let's say border 1 here. If all has gone well, and I do show IP interface brief, see, this is what I did here. I actually copied the running configs out of my SD access fabric, and then I removed some of the things that I knew were going to blow it up. So I removed the Cisco TrustSec configuration, I removed a lot of the policies, and I removed the certificate chains, because there's a ton of certificates that go back and forth from the running config. But if you see here, we can do show run, and you can see that's a lot, right? There's a lot of configs that go on here, and at this point, this is basically working. This is the core routing functionality of an SD access fabric that I've made in this environment here. So if you've watched our content on deploying an SD access fabric on CBT Nuggets, you'll understand the differences between the loopback interfaces, the Lisp interfaces, and the VLAN interfaces, how one is the Anycast gateway, how others are the point-to-point connectivities, and how BGP operates here. You can see things like we've got the Lisp configuration here, and we can see that the Lisp configuration is specifying the tables, the RLOCs, the VXLAN configuration, even though VXLAN doesn't work in a virtualized environment. You get the idea. Like, this is like the core functions of an SD access fabric are all here. And if I give it show IP route, you can see it's got the Lisp level 1 routing configuration shared here. And then, you know, a little spoiler, here's the BGP configuration. The BGP configuration is the real challenge, in my opinion. If you watch our content on CBT Nuggets, you'll probably be doing fine until it comes time. Actually, I need to change my color on my pen. 1 second, because this is pink. Okay. You'll find that the challenge when it comes to deploying an SD access fabric happens right here. You see, these 4 devices, border 1, border 2, edge 1, and edge 2, this is the SD access fabric. These things over here are not the SD access fabric. So how do devices or the people that are over here connected into the fabric, how do they get out of the fabric? Maybe to the internet, or maybe to a DNS server, or a DHCP server, or a firewall, or anything like that. That's the challenge, I think, when it comes to SD access, and that's where you really do have to have expert level skills. This is going to be a BGP handoff, and then we have to perform the correct amount of route leaking depending on the border node roles. That's why, like, this is a really advanced and challenging topic, and I think the challenge here is centered all around understanding the SD access design. One of these is an internal border. One of these is a default border. So how routes get leaked on the Fusion router is very important depending on what kind of border node they're connecting to. So if that's new to you, if this is challenging or new, you're in for quite the learning experience when a little practice exam video goes live on that. But I cannot stress this enough. If you're worried about SD access on the CCIE exam, you need to get hands-on, even for free, even if you can't change the config. You need to get hands-on with the DevNet Sandbox or dcloud, and you got to watch the content on CBT Nuggets, because we really did shift through a lot of stuff in order to show you exactly how to deploy that fabric. What else we got here? Okay, that's a good question here. Is multi-fabric part of the SD access in the blueprint? Does it specify that? I don't think it specifies it, but it could be a good design question. No, it's right there. Multi-site using SD-WAN transit. Lost my pen. There we go. Yeah, so there's single site and multi-site. So we could have a fabric here and a fabric here. And then we have to use SD-WAN to transit between these. How does our scalable group tags make it over this tunnel? That's going to be an important design consideration that you're going to have to... I don't think it's very challenging. They have, when you deploy SD access, you do have transit fabrics that you deploy as part of it. And that's actually very important for how you configure the border node handoff in the first place. You can deploy a basic IP transit network, or you can deploy an SD access transit network. So handing that off via SD-WAN and making sure your scalable group tags, if that's the kind of fabric you're trying to deploy, that's called a multi-campus fabric, distributed fabric. That's what it's called, a distributed campus, where you have the same VLANs and same virtual networks separated, maybe geographically. And that's what you would need to look into, is how to deploy a distributed campus. Good question. I drew your beer and listens to you, but I'm only CC name. Starting to play an Encore in 6 months. Why? Because I'm interested. Thank you, Duma. Thank you for that. And cheers to you who is drinking a beer and watching me rant and rave about this. It's past 1 o'clock, so I do have to wrap it up here in the next couple minutes. We'll try and wind this down in the next 4 or 5 minutes. I'm going to go a little over because, man, that's so embarrassing about that audio problem at the very beginning. What other questions do y'all have for me? Are you going to provide a UNL file for SD-WAN for CBT when it's released? The answer to that right now is no, but there is an ongoing discussion about how we could. Great question, but as for right now, the answer is no, but the idea has been punted around. We are using EVNG in Sandwich course, and we have an entire skill dedicated to helping you set up an SD-WAN environment in EVE-NG. So we walk you through the steps on, you click on this, you go here, you type this in order to get your SD-WAN environment up and running in EVE-NG. So that's a great question. While we might not provide the topology, we still can help you set it up, and we have content specifically for building an SD-WAN lab coming as part of that course. Has software-defined networking, data center routing technology, enterprise. Okay, so software-defined networking technologies are absolutely in this. Data center, no. There's not going to be any ACI or UCS, no UCS director in the enterprise infrastructure one. You know, it's an interesting question because when you're learning about SD access, there's absolutely a data center on a large campus, right? So people in our SD access fabric may need to communicate to a data center, and in that data center, they may be running ACI. So it's not uncommon for today's network engineer to need to know both, but that is, of course, reserved for very large enterprises. I myself have not been in an environment like that where I've needed to know ACI as well as something else. So interesting question. Are you going to record a CCNP design course? We kicked it off this week. So we had a sign-up sheet this week. We're going to be kicking it off on Monday. So yes, we're finishing up SCORE and DevCore right now. Then we're going into the InSalad exam, the design course next. So might not be out this year. That would be a little bit of a time crunch, but it is coming. Going further to SD Access CVT Nuggets, thank you. Cool. Thank you for checking us out on CVT Nuggets for the SD Access course. I can promise you're going to like it. It's a big one. It's a doozy. Screen is not moving. That's because I'm right here and I hit the wrong button. I see what's happening here. Sorry about that. Here we go. So, yeah. Crazy day. Crazy day. Any other good questions that we got here? I really appreciate y'all. I really appreciate the community and being able to chat with y'all. And learn about what you've got going on, your stresses. Because look, I'm in the trenches with you, right? I'm trying to pass this thing and learn for myself. What else? What else do y'all want to talk about? We're going to be doing this every Friday in October, starting at noon. Promise there will be no technology problems next time, as long as I hit the right buttons. Live streams really do have me beat in a lot of ways. There's some good stuff here. Two more things I want to point out about automation, the vManage API and the DNA Center API. Cover those extensively in our SD-WAN course and our SD Access course. That will have what you need in order to get going with those things. Cool thing about DNA Center is the API documentation is on the DNA Center appliance itself. So you can browse and just grab what you need straight out of the DNA Center documentation. Let's see. Do I prefer EVE-NG or GNS3? EVE-NG, and it's not even close, but EVE-NG Pro. That's the appropriate one to say there. EVE-NG Pro provides the Docker containers. So one of my favorite things, if I start this switch up right here, you see this little Wireshark container here. All I have to do now, I can click on this device and launch it. Let me bring it over here. Hang on. Bring it onto the screen. I'll click OK. And Ethernet, that's what I'm scanning. And you can see it launches a little Wireshark container for me right here. Even cooler, I can right-click on the device, choose Capture, and choose which interface I want to capture on. Does the exact same thing. Got to reconnect. And there we go. See? Now I've got a Wireshark capture running on that exact interface. This is what EVE-NG Pro brings to the table, is the fact that it has Wireshark, the GUI server. If you haven't seen the GUI server, this is another big one for me. This is a little container that comes with EVE-NG Pro. I'll launch it real quick. Click OK. Maybe expand it out a little bit. There it is. See, I've got a little GUI server here. It comes with Firefox. It's running Nginx on it, so it's running a little web server on it. And now I have and it's got a little TFTP server. Now I have the ability to test all sorts of protocols with a little lightweight, little GUI server that comes built into EvenG Pro. Beyond that, EvenG Pro has the lab tasks and the lab details and the things like that. So that way, when I have these lab tasks like the internet network one that we were challenged on, that's a big deal for me. That's worth the money when it comes to EvenG. Just passed an RC yesterday. Congratulations. That's a huge thing. Should I start preparing for CCIE Enterprise? If you want to. There's only a handful of CCIEs in the world. What, like 2,000 or 3,000 people a year pass in the world? That's it. It's going to be some great job security for you, but it's a mountain. It's a huge mountain to climb. And it takes, a pretty tough mentality to get there. It's going to take you 6+ months for most people. And it's just grueling studying and a tremendous amount of content to learn. It'll make you a better network engineer. It'll make you a lot more valuable. But don't hurt yourself trying to do it either. Can you prepare for the CCIE with only virtualization? Most people do. Most people do prepare for the CCIE with only virtualization. Your challenge, of course, is going to be SD access because you can't virtualize that. I say that. You can virtualize DNA Center. There are people out there who have done it. There's actually YouTube content on it. I've seen it where somebody, got an ISO of DNA Center and got it up and running in ESXi. It takes a gigantic server to do that. Yeah, for the most part, you're going to have a hard time when it comes to SD access. Literally everything else, though, you can do right here in EvenG, including the automation, including SD-WAN, and all of the routing protocols. So most of it, yes. Any EvenG discount coupon? I don't know. I'm not affiliated with EvenG, at least not yet. I don't have any like partnership coupons or anything like that. You can always reach out to them, just tweet them, see what they say. They're super helpful people in helping people get stood up with EvenG Pro. So that's another good question. I don't have anything there in that regard. What specs of my server am I running for this topology? My virtual machine has 24 vCPUs and 48 gigs of RAM. With all of these devices turned on, it only sits like 6% CPU usage and like 47% RAM usage. So it's wildly over-provisioned. My virtual machine is wildly over-provisioned for this lab. Beyond that, you don't have to turn everything on. You can, like you can see right here, I've only got a handful of these devices turned on for what I needed for like the Internet Network Challenge or the MPLS Network Challenge. And these are using the IOL images, which are tiny, tiny, tiny lightweight images that barely use any resources. So, yeah, it's like small computers can still run portions of this lab. So that's what I would say there. Never ready for the exam. One hand learning the technology, second is passing a cert. Yeah, I get what you mean. It's easy to learn in lab and feel comfortable, and then you get into an exam environment and they hit you with something hard. Boson practice exams have been one of the most critical reasons that I pass a practice exam or a real exam because they get me in the mindset of what kinds of questions can be asked and how to think through them. CCIE is going to be totally different, and that's why I just want to take the exam. I just want to see what it's like. Because without any sort of practice exams out there on this new content, what do you have to go off of other than the exam itself? So sympathize with you there. I would definitely dig into Boson practice exams if you struggle in the exam environment. What sources am I using for CCIE? CBT Nuggets, first of all. I think that's, kind of an obvious one. We've got all of the content somewhere on our site, or at least the majority of the content somewhere on our site. You'll see like our CCIE content, you're like, well, this is kind of old, but so is the book Routing TCP IP. It's like 15 or 20 years old, and we all still read it, right? That's because some of these protocols don't change that much year in and year out. So I've used CBT Nuggets first and foremost. That's been a critical part of my learning. And then, of course, all of the new technologies we have or will be out very soon within the catalog, like SD-WAN. I use some stuff off of Udemy. I like JP Cedeno. I think that's how you say his name. He is with Extreme IE. I think I bought some of his routing courses, and that helped a lot. I've used a little bit of INE's content. They have a nice little exam walkthrough type thing. It's like 20 hours long. I blasted right through that. But for the most part, it's been like really just me reading a ton of books. That's been CBT Nuggets and reading any book that I can get my hands on, and then labbing in EvenG as much as possible. That's been my primary resources. So that's it. That's where I'm going to wrap up. We've gone a little bit over, and it's because I had the audio problems in the first 10 minutes. I'm so sorry about that. Next week, we're going to have that worked out, I promise. Thank you guys so much for spending some time with me and watching and chatting and talking about BGP and then some other things. Next week, we're going to talk about IGPs like OSPF and EIGRP. Then we're going to talk about VPNs, then software-defined networking, which I know y'all are excited about, and then automation, which I'm excited about. So that's been what I've got to bring to the table. We're all in this together. Let me know what I can do to help you. Let me know, in the comments below. Let me know on Twitter. Whatever the case you need, just holler at me. I'm here to help. Thank you all for stopping by. We'll see you next week.